to Truthfull. In this podcast, we will tackle challenging Bible questions, but we will try to do that as simply as content allows us. My name is Brian, and I am privileged this morning to have my two special guests with me. On my left-hand side, Dr. Wann Fanwar, who is an Old Testament specialist. How are you, Doctor?
I'm fine. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you for being with us today. And next to him is Dr. Gerard Bernard. He is a New Testament specialist. Welcome, Dr. Gerard.
Thank you, Pastor Brian.
Now, the first big question for us to tackle is a major concern for anyone who reads Bible in English. Which is the best and safest version? And what are your thoughts on this, Dr. Fanwar?
I admit the profusion of English translations is difficult for people. There are just so many in the market. And whatever we are going to say here today will probably disappoint someone.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem arises from the a failure to recognize the level of difficulty that comes with Bible translations.
Dr. Fanwar, what does this have to do with Bible versions?
Well, I'm an Old Testament specialist, right? I work with Hebrew. The Old Testament was written largely in Hebrew. Now, Hebrew is a Semitic language, which means that it has minimal or almost no similarities to English. Okay, so when you're trying to move from that language to this language, a lot of things are going to get lost in the way.
Well, the New Testament was written in what we call Koine Greek. Now, Greek has different era. Like, for example, you have the classical Greek, but the New Testament was written in Koine Greek. Now, while Koine Greek has the same family of language like the Indo-European group of languages, Koine Greek is closer to the Old or Middle English than the modern English. So that makes it quite challenging.
Well, I can't really get that, but can you explain what that means?
For example, in English, you have what we call the Old English, the King James. We call it English in the 16th century, for example, and even before that. You have what we call the Beowulf English. Those are very old English, and we can't actually recognize even some of the letters from there. But we do have like what we call the Middle English and so on and so forth. No, Greek has that leveling as well. You have what we call the Homerian Homer, no, the Greek of Homer, and so the classical Greek, perhaps very close to what. Well, let me put it this way. Okay, the Koine Greek is probably similar to what we call the Shakespearean English, in a way. Okay, so we have that Koine Greek is closer to that kind of English. So we do not understand some of the English that were used to be spoken in the past, but the modern English is different from that. So the Koine Greek is not anything like the modern English. It's more like the Middle English or the old one.
Dr. Fanwar, Old Testament.
The same thing happens in every language. So classical Hebrew, even I cannot read it. Okay, and it does exist in some very ancient manuscripts, but eventually they adopted what is called the square Aramaic script. That's the one that you actually see in Hebrew Bibles like this one. But this is something that came around the exile period, the Babylonian exile period, so 5th, 6th centuries BC. The Jews were much more careful about how they handled the text. And so they developed rules for even counting the number of letters in a column or in a line. And this way they were able to standardize the text. Now, modern Hebrew is very different as well, because modern Hebrew reverted to the eras of Hebrew where you had consonants but no vowels. The Hebrew Bible has vowel signs. There are no actual vowels in Hebrew, vowel signs. But in modern Hebrew, they did away with the vowel signs as well. So when you pick up a newspaper in Jerusalem, you can sort of recognize the letters. It doesn't mean you can read. Plus, modern influences from Yiddish, from Sephardic Judaism, from other languages, Arabic even, have crept into the language. So even modern Hebrew is quite different from biblical Hebrew. So biblical Hebrew occupied a particular period of history until its standardization in the 10th century. That's the one we are wrestling with, not so much the classical Hebrew or modern Hebrew.
So how that can be a problem?
Let's suppose that, let me give you an example from a different language. I was doing a course on German as part of my studies, and I had a German classmate. And we were given texts by German theologians who are very difficult to read, very difficult to translate. And so we had to study, we had to read so that we can translate in the exam. And this German friend of mine was reading the English translations instead of the original German. So I asked him, "You're German, why are you reading the English one?" He said, "Because the translation is easier than the original German." There's a theory, a linguistic theory, that when you translate something, roughly 40 to 50% of what you translate gets lost. And this is true when you move from any language to any language, from English to Bahasa and vice versa, from English to Thai and vice versa, and more so in the Bible. So the whole argument about people choosing Bible versions displays a lack of understanding of that process of translation and how it impacts the versions.
So probably you can provide a specific example for our audience.
Let's begin with looking at lexical data. Okay, English has over 1 million words already. That's a lot of words. According to the latest studies, a university graduate probably has a vocabulary of 150,000. Okay, now
Only
people on this table with some higher degrees, hopefully it's gone up to 200 or 250,000. But that's nothing when you consider the million. Now, biblical Hebrew had about 24,000 words. So what do? When you have a lot of words, you can keep the meanings very narrow. So they're very specific. Think about how many different words for walk we have in English. And each one describes a particular kind of walk. But in Hebrew, you have one word for walk. And that can be metaphoric, it can be literal, it can be physical, it can be about love and, or relationship with God or relationship with one another. In other words, it has what we call a wider semantic range. And so when you translate, translators will be like, I think we'll use this area of equivalence, or we'll use this word for equivalence. And it makes it difficult because neither one is wrong. They're both correct, but they're looking at different spectrum of the Hebrew text.
Let's look into the first text in the Bible, Genesis 1 verse 1, Dr. Fanwar.
Okay, ask anybody in church to recite Genesis 1:1.
In the beginning, God created heavens and the earth.
And the English translations haven't changed very much from William Tyndale's time. People think King James Bible is the most influential, but actually it was William Tyndale's translation that predates and affected all English translations. So we think we know what it says, right? But when you go back and examine the Hebrew, then you begin to wonder, because the Hebrew has, for example, the name for God is Elohim.
Yes.
Okay. Elohim is a plural noun. And here's where you run into a first difficulty, because English has only two numbers for nouns, singular and plural. Singular is one, plural is anything more than one. But Hebrew has three has three numbers. It has singular, it has dual, it has plural.
Okay.
Singular is one, okay, no problem there. Dual is two, and some things are always dual. And then plural. Plural is not more than one, as in English, it is more than two, which is totally different. So are we talking here about one God or many gods? Okay, it had to be more than two because it's Elohim. Or is it something else? Now when you dig a little deeper, you discover that in this context, and in most of the biblical contexts, Elohim is treated as a singular noun, even though it is plural in form. And so all our English translations translate God, G-O-D, no plural. But there are specific contexts when it has to be translated as gods. For instance, when it's referring to the various deities of the Canaanites. Okay, and so what do we do in English? G-O-D-S with the G not capitalized. Okay, but some people jump from that to say, well, that means this is proof of Trinity. Right? No, it isn't, because this is not a plural of numbers. It's what we call a plural of majesty. It is a title that shows the elevation of God. Correct. So because God is so high, you can't refer to him in singular. It has to be in plural. The way Queen Elizabeth II used to do in her speeches. Correct. She would never use I. She would always use we. Okay, and so we should understand that. But somehow when it comes to the Bible, we lose some common sense. Okay. So it's plural, but it's not a proof for Trinity. It's not saying that there are so many gods, but rather that this is expressing a concept of God. God is so high, he's got to be bigger than one.
So if that is true, why don't we just be consistent in just using the G-O-D-S with small letter G every time?
I think the problem is the English. It's not the Hebrew. The Hebrew does it. Okay, it's Elohim every time. Okay, there is no singular form for Elohim. Okay, the closest to a singular form for Elohim is Elohah, which almost seldom appears in the Hebrew Bible. So it is, the game is with English. What do we do with it? If we want to talk about the one God, then we have to do something else in English. This is not a Hebrew problem, this is an English problem. That's why when you understand the difference between the two languages, even at this very basic, what we call lexical level, then you have a problem. You can't just jump from this to that. A here does not mean A over there. Okay, it might be something else over there.
Well, I hope we are still on track and not get more confused. New Testament, Dr. Gerard, do we encounter these language challenges in the New Testament Greek?
Yes, we do encounter this in Greek. Now, since we are using Genesis 1 verse 1, we will use the same phrase in the beginning, and that can be found in John 1 verse 1. Yes. Now, the word that is used for word there in the beginning was the word, is the Greek word logos. Now, it means, in many translations, it means word. It is translated always as word. But the challenge is twofold here, actually. Because firstly, John uses this word only in the prologue section of John chapter 1. Now, to be specific, it is from John chapter 1 verse 1 to 18. That's the only time John uses that word logos to refer to the word. Now, and there's a specific meaning in that, because later on we'll discover that that word is referring to not just the word that we read, but it is referring to a being, a person there. So that's the first issue here. That's the first challenge, because we cannot ascertain, we cannot actually be precise in, okay, logos means word. Because when we look at logos in its usage in, not in the Bible, it can refer to so many things. But John uses it there with a very specific idea in mind. So we cannot say, okay, this is what it means here, and this is what it means as it is. Because we need to look at the context as well and everything in there. Now, the other issue here, whenever we try to translate the word logos, is that we need to look at its parallel in the Old Testament. And the closest we can get there in the Old Testament is the word davar. Yes, davar. Because it means word, or thing. Logos seems similar to that as well. But again, it is something that we cannot just simply say, okay, this is the precise meaning of logos. Am I on track, Dr. Fanwar?
Yeah, I think we're still on track. If Brian is getting a little concerned. This is what we now know as a particular issue that the Bible faces. New Testament writers are writing in Koine Greek, but they are using a lot of what we call linguistically Hebraisms. In other words, they are borrowing and sounding, and maybe in their minds, since most of them were Jews other than Luke, they were thinking Hebrew. It's kind of like when I was growing up for a long time, I did all my mathematical calculations in my native language before I was able to switch to English. So I'll see the numbers there, but I'm working it in a different language in my brain. And this Hebraism seems to be particularly strong in some writers in the New Testament. I think Dr. Gerard knows this, and John is definitely one of those.
Yes, I agree with that, Dr. Fanwar.
It's like he's looking at the Hebrew Bible and, okay, what can I take from there to write what I need to write here? So that is, but this is lexical. It's still a very basic challenge of translation.
Correct.
Okay, so people think they know what logos, davar, or whatever it means. But when you go back to the original languages, they had different semantic ranges from English. Because in English, word is more specific. Because we have many other lexical forms in English for the same idea. But both Koine Greek and Biblical Hebrew are much more limited. And so they use a lot more with these things. And so that impacts how you understand John 1:1. We all know it from memory.
Yes.
John 1:1, Genesis 1:1.
1:1.
So, aside from the lexical issue, is there any other language issue that we should consider?
Yes. We should also consider the challenge in the way we understand it grammatically. Okay, so it has to do with grammar, syntax, these all challenges as well.
Yeah, go on.
All right, let me continue. Pastor Brian, the text very well. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, the Greek word, or the Greek sentence, or word, per se, does not care about word order at all. In English, in Bahasa, we normally use, subject, verb, and then you have the object, and the rest is predicate. We follow that format. So that's easier to detect, this is the doer, and this is the action, and then this is the recipient of the action. But in Greek, it does not care about the order. You can even put the subject after the verb. So this is how it works. Words, the function of a word is determined by its form. In other Indo-European language, you do have what we call the nominative, accusative. These are some of the forms, we call it. And so the word, especially in the third clause of the Genesis, John 1 verse 1. The word was God. The word, the form of that word and the form of God is both in the nominative. Now that means both are supposed to be in the subject. Now it can go like this. The logos, or the word, was God. It's correct in translation when we follow the grammar strictly. Or God was the word. Also, it's a correct translation because both are in the nominative. So this is where grammar and syntax becomes more challenging, when we translate the Bible.
So, how about in Hebrew?
Well, English has about 9 tenses. I think Koine Greek has what? 5?
More than 5 tenses.
5,
yes.
6. Hebrew has only two.
Oh my.
Okay, and here's the problem. English tenses are totally focused on time.
Yeah.
So when you say past tense, we're talking about time in the past.
Yeah.
When we say future tense, any of the versions, we're talking about time in the future. Hebrew tenses, Koine Greek is a bit mismatched. It's like a hybrid. Hebrew tenses have no time concept in them. And so even though we use the word tense, which literally from the Old English means time, it doesn't apply to Hebrew tenses. Hebrew tenses only care about action. Okay, and this is reflected actually in the cultural mindset. Only cares about action. That's why there are only two, because they perceive action as being completed or as being incomplete. That's all. Okay, so when you look at Genesis 1:1, the first verb is bara.
Bara.
God created, and it is in the perfect tense, which means it's something completed. Not that it's completed in some past time, but that it's done. It's not to be repeated again. The imperfect tense would include things like habits, ongoing actions. Many prophecies, for instance, would do that. But a second complication with Hebrew tenses is they have this weird thing that doesn't happen in any other language. They like to switch around. Okay, so if you don't pay attention to how the sentence is working, the grammar is working, you'll find that the perfect has switched places with the imperfect and vice versa. And you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right when you translate to English.
Right.
Because you didn't pay attention to the switch. It's like driving a car, suddenly the steering is gone from the right side to the left side. You're like, wait, what just happened here? Okay, and Hebrew does that an awful lot. It's called the Wav consecutive sentences, and it's havoc because it's hard to translate. Okay, if imperfect usually shows ongoing actions, then the closest in English would be the ing verbs.
Yes.
Eating, sleeping, rather than
Creating.
just sleep. Yeah, creating, and so that is one of the first grammatical challenges that we meet right in verse 1.
That's why,
first verse of the Bible.
When we mentioned about the word bara, which is the in English create, right?
Yep.
And then next to it is Bereshit, which is in the beginning. So, in English, I mean, if you were to translate it,
The word order.
literal order, is like created in the beginning God or something like that, right?
Yeah, because the Hebrew word order, the verb comes prior to the subject, unlike English.
Yes.
In English, subject always comes first, and then the verb. In Hebrew,
Interesting.
verb comes first. And Hebrew verbs already have the subject embedded in it.
Okay.
Okay, so if you look at Genesis 1:1, literally the word order is Bereshit bara Elohim. Elohim is a subject. Bereshit is a time clause. But bara also has a subject embedded in it. It's a third person masculine, right? So if you were to translate literally, as some people claim you should do, word for word, it would mean in the beginning, he created God.
Yeah, okay. Understand.
And so in English, we immediately have to switch that because we know instinctively that is not possible. So in the beginning, switch, God created.
So still, actually, the translators, they already have the what do you call that? The syntax and grammatical knowledge to impose into that structure, so that it will, So when they translate it, it sounds English, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. We call it the source language and the receptor language, right? It must sound right in both.
Correct. It must sound right.
So when you take whatever the source language, in this case Hebrew and Koine Greek, when you take that, it must sound right in English. Otherwise, the gospel becomes nonsense. So translation is what enables us to make sense
Correct.
of the
Making
gospel.
sense. I like that. Any more grammar and syntax challenge in Genesis 1 verse 1?
We talked about the word order. Okay, so Elohim comes afterwards.
Yeah.
Let me talk a little bit about Bereshit and then about
Bereshit.
the two ending words. Bereshit is a time phrase. It's a compound time phrase. Now we think it means in the beginning.
First, in the beginning.
Yes, but it's a little bit more nuanced. And I'll tell you why. Bereshit is not used a lot in the Hebrew Bible. The writer who uses it the most is Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah, Bereshit always means a very specific time beginning. And he tags the reign of a king, the start of the reign of that king as Bereshit. And so we have to go back with this larger understanding to what does it mean there. So if you pick up, for example, the Good News Translation, which is the official translation of Bible Society, it gives you two possible reading, the traditional in the beginning, or an alternative reading, which is probably more correct grammatically, depends on your point of view, which would read something like this: when God began creating. So somebody who's used to the King James language in the beginning
Has to be
sees,
precise.
a
First.
GNT translation that says when God began, and they're like, hey, wait a minute, that sounds wrong. But it is not. Grammatically, it is possible. And so by understanding the two possibilities, it enriches our understanding there. Now, what about the objects? What did God create? Heavens and the earth. The word heavens is always in dual form. It's neither plural nor singular. That's why a good translator should keep the S in heaven. Some people try to remove it because in English it doesn't sound right. We only see one heaven, right? But in Hebrew they envision heaven in different layers. Okay, and so the argument about should you keep God as singular or heaven as singular is mute, because the language doesn't really allow you to do that. And to capture the essence of the language, heavens has to be rendered as heavens and God as God, not gods. See, so the Elohim, which is plural form, is rendered singular in English. Heavens, which is dual form, has to be kept, otherwise we get the wrong concept of heaven by reducing it to singular in English. So yes, one little sentence, one of the shortest sentences in the Hebrew Bible, and yet so many things to consider when you sit down to translate.
Dr. Gerard, John 1, any intriguing grammar and syntax there that we can consider?
Well, I guess we have mentioned about the logos, and Dr. Fanwar has mentioned about the term in Greek we call as the verb to be en. Okay, it is used 3 times there, and it is closer in translation if we put ing there in English. So I think we have mentioned that. I think I can think of one more in that 1 verse 1, where normally if we look at the term God, whenever we look at it, it has a definite article in there. But in this particular word, in the 3rd clause of the verse, it does not have definite article. So what do we do with that? Should we simply say God? Or can even mean gods, maybe? So that is also a challenge we need to do. How do we look at it? Which one should be the subject?
Probably to set a foundation in the beginning, because that's the first, right? The surface, and then you can still continue to explore the rest of the Bible, but to really set a foundation with that kind of translation where people understands it as being very it brings weight and authority, right? In the beginning, God. So even theologically, if we want to explore, it talks about God, it talks about creation, it talks about God's sovereignty and creatorship. That probably that convention is being held until now. I have not read any English translations
that says otherwise.
When God started creating or something. So maybe they want to preserve that foundation. We are just actually scratching the surface. but hopefully we shall receive more enlightenment in the upcoming episodes. Thank you once again, Dr. Fanwar, Dr. Gerard.
You're welcome.
So, either one of you, do you have any favorite Bible versions in mind?
People ask me a lot this question. Now, different periods of life, I've had different favorite. Okay, first it was the RSV, and then the NIV, and then the HCSB, and now I'm using a lot the NLT and then RSV.
Okay.
But the answer I give church members today when they ask, "What's your favorite version?" I say Bible Gateway. Okay. And there's a reason. Bible Gateway is an online website that contains all of the versions.
Yeah, all the versions.
And so you can check anything you want, from a very literal translation like the Young's literal translation to some of the most paraphrasal kind of translation like God's Word and CEV and so on. And so you can pick. And the reason I say that is I believe that Christians should do that. Because there's a reason God has enabled the dominant language of the world to produce so many different versions of the Bible, because I think you cannot find it in just one thing. Let me use a more household expression. Most people know only one way to cook rice, but rice is the most flexible grain. That's why it's the most abundant grain on earth. And I know about 20 different recipes of rice. Most people are like, is that possible? Can you have? At the end of the day, it's still rice, but it's also different. You get different textures, different tastes, different understanding, different grains, the long, the short, the round, and so on, the different colors. And so you have to learn, each rice grain requires a different cooking technique, literally. Okay, you can't use the same thing, just dump them in a rice cooker and expect the same results. No, it won't work that way. And so Bible Gateway is like having this big rice cooker that enables us to say, okay, let's try this style, let's try that style. And so you can pick any version you want. Plus, Bible Gateway has all the language versions as well, and that allows you to go across your own native language more easily to check if the Bible is correct, or if your Bahasa translation or Thai translation is correct, So that's my favorite version now.
Dr. Gerard, any specifics?
Well, I just want to add to the Bible Gateway version because I'm also looking at two other online version. One is Bible Hub. That's also a good one. And then there's another one, Blue Letter Bible. I'm also using that one. Also provide different version of the Bible, But of course, I also like to see other translations of the Bible. For example, in my own native language and so on and so forth.
Too.
It would really nice to see, what is the difference between, for example, Terjemahan Baru, the Indonesian version, or the Versi Borneo, for example. So I'm also interested in it, So to answer the question, I won't pick up one Bible. We have already discussed the reason why we should not pick up just one version. And so I guess adding to it, if you have the ability to read in its original language, maybe pick the Hebrew Bible or the Greek Bible in a way. Okay.
Yeah. We can't really just be so, what do you call that, to say obsessed, also being so what is the term used, but being open to read, to explore, and have faith, right?
Yes.
Have faith in the translations, and but I guess it's good to being able to taste all the different kinds of rice recipes, right?
Yes.
From the biryani to the Arab rice and the Japanese, what do you call it? Rice, sushi, and so on and so forth. So, I think having said all this, if you wish to be truthful, that's the title of our podcast, Truthfull with Full, get back to some serious Bible study. And we hope to see you again in the next episode.